The woods were silent, save for the soft crunch of snow under Evelyn's boots. The air was bitterly cold, and her breath formed clouds that hung in the stillness before dissipating. She pulled her coat tighter and glanced at the fading light. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the snowy landscape in hues of orange and gray. She had ventured out later than planned, and the path back to the cabin felt longer than she remembered. It wasn't until she heard it that she stopped dead in her tracks. A faint sound, almost lost in the howling wind. A child's cry. Evelyn froze, her heart thudding in her chest. She strained her ears, thinking it must be her imagination. But then it came again. Faint but unmistakable. A soft, pitiful wail carried through the icy air. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. It felt absurd to speak. She hadn't seen another soul for miles. Yet the cry continued. A desperate sob that seemed to drift from deeper within the woods. Against every instinct screaming at her to turn back, Evelyn stepped off the path. The snow was deeper here, pulling at her legs with every step. The crying grew louder, guiding her like a beacon. The trees closed in around her, their skeletal branches forming eerie shapes against the darkening sky. "Are you lost?" she called out again, louder this time. Her words disappeared into the void of the forest. As she trudged forward, she caught a glimpse of movement ahead. A small figure stood between the trees, barely visible in the dim light. Evelyn's breath caught. It was a child, a little girl no older than 6. She wore a thin, white dress that fluttered unnaturally in the wind, and her bare feet left no prints in the snow. "Oh my God," Evelyn whispered, fear clawing at her chest. "Are you okay?" The child didn't answer. She stood motionless, her face obscured by matted hair. The crying had stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. Evelyn hesitated, every fiber of her being urging her to turn and run. But something about the girl's small, frail figure held her in place. "Where are your parents?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking. She took a cautious step forward. The girl's head tilted slightly, and Evelyn thought she saw her lips move, forming words too soft to hear. "What did you say?" Evelyn asked, taking another step closer. She leaned forward, straining to hear. That's when the girl lifted her head. Evelyn's breath hitched. The girl's face was pale and sunken, her eyes two hollow black voids. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, and a bone-chilling scream tore through the woods. Evelyn stumbled back, her heart hammering as the sound pierced her ears. She turned to run, but the snow seemed to clutch at her legs, slowing her escape. Behind her, the girl's cries turned to laughter, a cruel, echoing sound that surrounded her. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears as she pushed on through the snow, her lungs burning from the cold air. The laughter grew louder, closer, until it was right behind her. She burst onto the trail, slipping and falling into the snow. Scrambling to her feet, she glanced over her shoulder. The woods were empty. The laughter had stopped. Only the whisper of the wind remained. Panting, Evelyn sprinted back to the cabin. She locked the door and collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion and terror. Outside, the wind howled and the trees groaned under the weight of the snow. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. And then she heard it again. The faint, pitiful cry of a child, just outside the cabin door. Her blood ran cold. She crawled toward the window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered out. The girl stood in the clearing, her dark eyes staring directly at Evelyn. She raised one hand and pointed at the door. Evelyn backed away, her heart pounding in her ears. The crying stopped, replaced by a soft knock on the door. "Let me in," a small voice said, muffled by the thick wood. "I'm so cold." Evelyn's hands flew to her ears, tears streaming down her face. "Go away," she whispered. "Please, go away." The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then came a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "You can't hide from me." The lights flickered, and the cabin plunged into darkness. Evelyn's scream was lost in the winter storm as the cold crept in, stealing the warmth from the room and leaving only silence behind. Evelyn woke to the sound of her own ragged breathing. She was sprawled on the wooden floor of the cabin, the blanket clutched tightly in her hands. The fire in the hearth had died completely, leaving the room frigid. Her head throbbed as she struggled to piece together what had happened. Her eyes darted to the window. The clearing was empty, the snow pristine and untouched. She could almost convince herself it had been a nightmare, if not for the faint scratches on the cabin door. Long, jagged marks carved into the wood. Determined to leave, Evelyn gathered her belongings with trembling hands. She threw her backpack over her shoulder and stepped outside. The forest was eerily quiet, the air heavy with a suffocating stillness. She avoided looking too closely at the tree line, fearing she might see those hollow eyes staring back. Halfway down the trail to her car, she stopped abruptly. The snow ahead was disturbed, marked by faint footprints leading away from the cabin. They were impossibly small, like a child's. They veered off into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. Evelyn's stomach churned, but she forced herself to keep walking. Her car was just ahead, partially buried under a layer of snow. She fumbled with the keys, desperate to leave this place behind. The engine roared to life, and she let out a shaky breath of relief. As she pulled onto the road, she glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw the girl standing at the edge of the trees, her white dress billowing in the wind. Evelyn blinked, and the figure was gone. But as the miles stretched on, the sense of unease didn't fade. The air inside the car grew colder, her breath fogging the windshield despite the heater blasting at full force. And then she heard it, a faint, pitiful cry coming from the back seat. Evelyn didn't dare look. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the wheel tighter, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The crying grew louder, filling the car with an unbearable sadness. Finally, unable to stand it, she glanced into the rearview mirror. The girl's hollow black eyes stared back at her, and her lips curled into a haunting smile. The car swerved as Evelyn screamed, and the last thing she saw was the tree rushing toward her, the girl's laughter echoing in her ears. They found the car wrapped around a tree the next morning, its windows frosted over from the inside. The snow around it was undisturbed, save for the faint imprints of small, bare feet leading back into the woods. But what puzzled them most were the footprints. Small, childlike prints, barefoot despite the bitter cold, circled the car again and again. They led off into the forest, vanishing into the shadows beyond the tree line. When the search party followed the prints, they found nothing, only the unbroken stillness of the woods. But deep among the trees, one swore they heard it, the faint, pitiful cry of a child, drifting on the icy wind. What did you think of this chilling tale? Leave a comment with your thoughts, theories, or favorite moments. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more terrifying tales. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Stay warm and stay safe.